Good evening. I'm Kari Reagan, moderator of natschats, and welcome to our final Nats chat of the season. And a big special welcome to Tom Burke. Thank you for joining us tonight, Tom.
Thanks for having me, Kari, and to the folks at NATS.
So you can read so many things on Tom out on Google. Of course, he's widely known. So I'll just give a little brief bio that he is a speech language pathologist based in New York. He provides voice training and rehabilitation services to professional singers and actors in film, TV, music, and Broadway. And hopefully some of you saw the wonderful show on Broadway called In a Man's World that debuted last fall, which I really enjoyed, Tom. And you enjoyed being a part of that?
Yes, it was a good, unusual experience.
Yes. You want to share any secrets with us?
Oh yeah, so we just dive right into that.
Yeah, let's dive in.
So I think it was a show about essentially women who've experienced some form of inequality. Go figure, right? So it was about taking these four women who, in the workplace or at home, experienced some sort of overt inequality, and then wanted to go back into the environment as a man. And so the show was called In a Man's World, and with myself, a body language coach, and then two prosthetics specialists from like the X-Men movies, I think they were done. We collectively helped transform these women into a male counterpart so they could go back in and experience the same situation as a different gender. And then at the end, we had a facilitation to explore kind of what the experience was like on behalf of the people in the working environment or in the family and themselves. And it was pretty transformative, to say the least.
You
but
could
it's also
tell.
controversial.
You could tell that they genuinely had these authentic reactions, as did, I remember it's been several months since it debuted, what, in October or something?
Yeah.
And I remember one in particular in a pool hall.
Yes.
And one of the fellow pool players, I'm so sorry, they're probably called something better than that, but we'll go with that.
Yeah.
Okay. And he, in particular, his behavior, he seemed, at least for the way the TV portrayed it, as having had a transformative experience.
Yes, I think a lot of the men in the show realized the subtle ways in which, and not so subtle ways, of course, where you can denigrate someone, put them down, make them feel uncomfortable, make them feel like they are other than you. And so this was just about, it was really kind of reflecting on the little ways we can include each other or exclude each other. And so each show had a different vibe about that. That was kind of the essence that wove all of it together.
Well, thank you for lofting that beautiful segue ball to my court, because denigrating people, right, it leads right into how we as voice teachers can create a safe place for our students, and that's our topic at hand tonight. So let's jump into this a bit and start with big picture first. Why is that important? Why is that something you're so passionate about?
I am passionate about creating a safe space because I realize the power that we didn't necessarily ask for, but the power that sometimes we have in the room as teachers, or the power that sometimes students relegate to us. And despite our best intentions, sometimes we can say things that can either exacerbate an underlying trauma for people, or can be part of the process that helps spiral someone into that. And I think we all can look back on moments where we received negative comments about our X, Y, or Z, and that gets stuck on you as a person. And I think early on in my career, I noticed that, you know, if an athlete has a knee injury, while that could be also devastating, there's something a little bit different about when someone has a vocal injury. They take it more personally because, and maybe that's not true, but at least that's what I observed, is there's something about that, like, I live here.
Yeah.
So when we're commenting on this,
yeah,
it's easy to make people feel less than or equal. So I think kind of early on, I realized that the power of words.
And so are there some broad strokes guidelines around language that we teachers use?
Yeah, Uh, I try to avoid things like good and bad, or even beautiful.
Hmm.
Now, because I try to think of what's the objective of the session, and does this serve the story? Does this serve the character? Does this serve the style? Does
Hmm.
this serve what you want out of it? Because ultimately, I think historically, the teacher-student dynamic could have been guru and mentee versus I think now it's much about like they are the customer and what does the
Right.
customer want and helping coach them on that. So that's not about earning my approval or earning what I think is beautiful, but more kind of what do you want to get out of this session? Okay, based upon that, here's where you were successful. Here's where you weren't, based upon the criteria that you are determining, not me.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. And I think to your point, I think independent teachers for sure live in that world that they're our customer. And so the dynamic can be quite different. I have both independent studio and I'm an academic teacher. So I also live in the university world, and the dynamic is extremely different
Mm.
because you don't have to sell them in essence every week. I mean, I don't personally change my teaching style, but I have lived in that academic environment. And I don't know, I think that's where that carryover of master student dynamic, master teacher, guru, still exists, I think, quite a bit. So you hear stories over and over about people that were traumatized by teachers. I hope that's not still going on, but um, I don't know. What is your sense around shame and why teachers might do they think that's a tool to help the student or?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I don't, I think teachers do have their students' best interest in mind. And I do think there is also personal responsibility on behalf of the students for how they receive language as well. So this is definitely a two-way street. So it's a kind of a slippery slope where you don't want to shame the victim, but also
Mhm.
not also infer things that the teacher never really said in the first place. I
Mhm.
know that I remember certain things that teachers may have said, or I may have interpreted it in a certain way, right? So I think because there is that slippery slope, it's just useful to think in advance, kind of how can we get the students to identify what is the measure of success, and then help coach them through that process. And
Mhm.
I just know over the years, lots of conversations at the beginning part of sessions were about reframing things that other teachers may have said, but I don't know if those teachers really said those things, or if the student heard those
Heard.
things, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I always got stuck with that. So I said, let's just kind of skip this whole, the past doesn't matter at this point, right? What do we want right now? And I think that that's kind of what the shift was like. What is the focus right now? And where
Mhm.
do we want to go? So switching from almost a therapy model, which is kind of like how we got here, and looking to the past, versus more of a coaching model, say where are we now, where do you want to go, and helping people reframe their focus to try to help folks come out of the old stories. Because oftentimes, because we're storytellers, we can also get stuck in stories sometimes.
Mhm. Our own narrative that
Yeah.
maybe isn't serving us anymore.
And also maybe that we are continuing to cycle through and add additional things on top of it that aren't necessarily
Mhm.
true or
Mhm.
useful.
Mhm. Um, Jerry Ellsbernd says that he totally agrees about the loss of voice due to an injury, which is so personal and can lead to major identity crisis to those who have had those issues. And of course, working with injured singers, it's true. It's like, as you said, we as singers are wrapped up in our identity as a singer. And so it's different than other athletes. Although I would say other athletes also have their own identities wrapped up in
Sure.
their sports, but our instrument lives in our body. I want to remind attendees there is a question box. So please feel free to open it up, and you're welcome via me. That it will come to me, not to Tom. I'm happy to ask on behalf of you. And I will say that we'll just add this levity for a minute. Dan Minton has said to tell you that your corona hair looks dashing.
My partner figured out how to cut hair from a YouTube video. It took about maybe 2.5 hours. which would otherwise, when I go to the barber, it takes like 10 minutes, like not much to work with. But yeah, so 2.5 hours later, he not too bad, right? Okay.
It does. He did a great job. It didn't even take me that long on my dog.
So somebody asked me like, oh, did I return the favor? And I'm like, no, I did not get those. Absolutely not.
That's funny.
I don't think he's gonna wear a hat for a little while longer.
Sorry for that little break of levity, but
Thank you.
we have to take it where we have it. Okay, so another person, Barbara, is saying she also votes, I also vote to get rid of the term vocal abuse. We don't call basketball players knee abusers. And yeah.
Totally, all those little words can people then think like, well, I did this to myself, or I'm a bad person, or clearly I don't have technique, or I'm never going to work again. I can't share this with anyone. It's a bad thing. All those words. Even that's what I mean. Even about beautiful, like commenting on whether someone sings like that was beautiful. Even if I feel it in the inside and I want to say, oh my gosh, that was like amazing, that was beautiful. I try to resist the urge to say that. And I'll say, how was that? And where is that in relation to where you want it to go? And like, oh, that would last 8 shows a week. Okay, great. Well, then let's explore. What were you doing there that you could do more often that you weren't doing before? Oh, I think I was doing something else. Well, what would you call that? I was pushing. Okay. So what's the opposite of pushing? Floating. Great. So how do I get you to float more than push? And they're like, ooh, I want to do this. So like they can say I was pushing. I don't want to say you were pushing.
And then you're using their language.
Yeah, using their language, not against them, but their language with them, I would say. So like, because I think once they open the door that they are sharing their experience, and then you can offer, okay, where along that continuum do you feel is going to serve our goal here? Then when they use those words, they're less triggering because they have offered them. Whereas if I offer my words first, I don't know the infinite context in which they're going to perceive that.
Right. It's really, I love that. And also, we know from motor learning, the more we can get them to help create the dynamic. And again, that's a shift from the old teacher, master, student model, where you get done singing, you look to the teacher, and then you just wait for them to tell you what all you did wrong so you can correct it. And that's shifting, as we all know, more and more. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I think I think I'm a delicate flower when it comes to these things too. I hated when a teacher would imitate what I just did and then demonstrate the correct way, because I perceived it as being made fun of, even though I know the intention was, oh, here's what you just did. Here's what I'd like you to do. In retrospect, I know that was the intention. I perceive the immediate imitation as being mocked.
Oh, interesting.
So that's what I quickly learned, like, oh, that's not necessarily the way to get to work with me. And maybe it's just me. And then but what's fortunate, I feel vindicated because early on, I was inspired by Kitty Bertolini's work on motor learning and resonant voice, and looking at this idea of scan, gel, show, tell. I think that's hopefully still the way she languages it. But this idea that telling someone what to do or modeling the way to do it isn't necessarily the fastest way to elicit the target response. So scanning, encouraging someone to notice in their own body what was going on and what would it be like to move here or there. That's actually the most efficient way for them to learn it. Even though you as a teacher have to think a little bit differently about how you're going to language it. From there, you can then say things like, what would happen if you lengthened the back of your neck a little more? Or what would happen if your right shoulder went back? What would happen there? Versus, oh, watch me, you're doing this. You're being a schlumpadora, you need to stand up, girl. It's like, excuse me, don't talk to me like that, And so I think even if we're being playful, we don't know, it becomes a slippery slope the further you get down towards modeling. I do like the idea that telling someone is useful, but for compliance purposes mainly, when you tell someone what to do, it's so they understand the rationale. And there is research to support that a balance of implicit and explicit learning does work. So people do like things explained, but we also have to balance that with a lot of sensory awareness. And I think early on, I was not taught that whole aspect of it. I was taught a lot of the tell people what to do, and not necessarily how to facilitate people feeling more.
Well, and some of that goes to a heuristic approach that I like to talk about, in that we help guide our students into self-exploration and learning how to articulate what they're experiencing, learning to self-direct a little bit. And I think that ties into that to some degree.
Absolutely. I think that's what is part of that creating the safe space, is that you are helping them be guided through their own experience versus coming to you for approval in that way. They're coming to learn more about themselves, not learn more about me. You know, or
that approval dynamic is really interesting, you know, and not only because teacher student, but there's something about my relationship with all my teachers was just a unique relationship because they held my dreams in their hand. I was counting on their expertise to help dreams come true, right? I mean, that's a pretty powerful place to hold in someone's life.
Yeah, and I also recognize how different cultures perceive this. I remember working with clients in New York saying, good, all right, again, nice, keep going. Love that type of language was met well. But then when I was teaching in Switzerland or in Germany, people would really get angry at me if I said good when the trial was not technically correct, because they said that was not good. Why did you say that? And I was like, oh, I'm actually rewarding the effort, not commenting on the actual. Yeah. But there was a huge disconnect. Like that just was not the way this particular group wanted to be spoken to. So I realized, oh, what an American bias I had, and also what a New York metropolitan bias I had. You know? And so that really kind of widened my ideas about, oh, I just need to drop my opinion altogether and just help and ask clearer questions.
And not give subjective kind of opinions is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Rather guide the process.
Unless they ask. At the end, if there's a lot of rapport and the space is safe, I think you can wink at the end, be like, ooh, but I really liked the last one because of X, Y, and Z. Or, you know what, I grew up listening to X, Y, and Z, and I just love that sound. So to get the A with me, try a little more that way. Like, I think there's a playfulness in saying, hey, either is valid, you are valid, you're an amazing technician. If you're asking me which one I would pull off the shelf, it's that one for me. Kind of, so I think you're allowed to have your own, you're allowed to like a particular flavor. I think as a secondary thing, so that's not enmeshed with the approval of the person. It's a preference for a take that they gave you.
I love that. It does. With regards to Kitty's scan, gel, show, tell, is there any part of your process of teaching where you demonstrate vocally without because the making fun of, you interpreted their demonstration. Am I understanding they maybe demonstrated what they heard from you and then did it their perceived correct way? So I never had teachers do that, but I did have them sing. They would then sing a line, and that actually helped me. And I hear that from students a lot too, that if they learn audibly, it really helps them to hear the correct sound. But what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I would say in that first phase of scan, part of the scan phase for me is also the assessment of how the person likes to learn. If they're a master imitator, that might be the shortest route to get them to do it. So I think it's this initial conversation about you as the customer. How do you want to be treated? How do you want me to refer to you? What are your pronouns? What are your preferred ways of learning? Are you a visual person? Are you an auditory person? And it's up to me as a teacher, you're paying me to figure that out. Like, how do I need to translate what I am trying to convey into a language that makes sense for you? So if that was your thing, I would then probably imitate more. And then I would say, what do you hear me doing that you weren't doing? And you can say, oh, well, I hear it sounds more like vanilla or something. Great. You know, so I would then use that to facilitate that scan phase.
I think that's one of the greatest gifts that's come out of the motor learning principles that are really being talked about in the voice teaching community, the last 10 years in particular, led by Kitty Bertolini, of course, is that it's changed the dialogue in the lessons, where oftentimes I'll hear something and I think, okay, that's what I want to work on. But before I say anything, I ask them for feedback. What did that feel like? What did you notice? You know, those typical motor learning tools. And oftentimes their response to me takes me in a completely different direction, which is obviously the more important direction because it speaks to them. It's not my agenda, it's their agenda. So I see that really having changed our profession a lot, the motor learning.
Yeah, and I think that, like you said, you work in an academic setting, so there is also like holding the curriculum that they might be.
Yeah.
So it's like that's, I think, the mental fatigue is in holding both. Like we know we know we have to get them from A to Z at some point, but they might need to go here before we get there. Even though we might think, okay, it's a simple process, they might need to go in what feels like left and right. To get there. So I think holding those two things, holding a curriculum and holding a dynamic learning process, that's a fun challenge, I think, as teachers.
Tom, do you have some favorite resources around this topic, around motor learning specifically?
I really, after experiencing Kitty's work, I also really enjoyed Kim Steinhauer's work on when to give feedback. I think this is also part of creating a safe space. This idea of, do you give it right away? Do you give it all the time? Do you never give it? It makes me think of my piano teacher in college. He never said anything except, and then one time he said, that was good. And I thought I was like the best pianist ever. I feel like I didn't get any feedback, just like that I needed to practice more. I remember on my juries, it said, why don't you practice more? You could be good. So when he said I was good, I was like, oh, yes, that was good. So
did that inspire you? Did that inspire you, that the one comment that said, why don't you practice more? You could be good. Was that, there's a piece of that would inspire me.
Yes. And I remember thinking, okay, what were they hearing as good that they wanted more of? And we'll talk about that. I think we should talk about that a bit. Okay. Is defining the criteria. But I like this idea of that intermittent terminal feedback is the most successful. So intermittent meaning once in a while at the end. So versus real-time biofeedback or after every single trial. So let's say someone is singing something and you let them know that that vowel modification is correct or not correct after each trial. It gets in their head. Or if they are watching your face for any sort of grimaces, you're providing real-time feedback versus do it again, do it again, do it again. Oh, that was it. Do it again, do it again. Watch that one. Do it again, do it again. Oh, there we go. Do it again. And then pausing, say like, that actually seems a little non-linear, or it seems a little more just playful, but actually facilitates their learning because they get to ride the vocal bike and figure out how to stay on themselves versus constant training wheels that get them in their head.
And the terminal feedback one is the do it again.
So after they've done the trial. So not giving it to them in the middle of it.
Right.
So giving it to them at the end, but once in a while. So let's say out of 10 times, let's say they're vocalizing, not giving feedback after each transposition up that they have said. Let them do what they're doing, and once in a while, maybe the second time, the fourth time, the ninth time, comment on the success of what they're doing, and then pause to say, hey, when I said, yep, yep, that was it, scan, what did you notice? What was the
Yeah.
common denominator amongst those things? Is it, oh, every time you said yep, I felt blank happening. Interesting. What was happening when you weren't in that spot? Oh, blank was happening. Okay, great. So again, you can you make these strategies you blur the lines so they don't know what's happening, but
Mm-hmm.
you're secretly infusing some of those tools in the course of it feels like conversation, but underneath it's kind of like adhering to the rules of learning.
Very interesting. I've been with COVID looking for silver linings of teaching full time online. And one of the things I've started doing that I've enjoyed, and there's something you said that made me think of this, is the first 10, 12 minutes of a lesson, I'm letting them vocalize and they are to pretend that I'm not there.
Hmm.
And the awesome thing about that is they're in their environment where they generally would practice anyway
Right.
rather than doing that in my studio. They're already in their own environment. It takes them a minute to settle in because I'm watching, but oh my goodness, I'm learning so much because of course we all know that it's our job to teach students how to practice,
Hmm.
not how to sing, but how to practice that. And what you're talking about really guides that process and allows them to trust their own instincts. And so it's just interesting. It's been an interesting experiment to be able to let them do their thing and then provide feedback about how they're vocalizing and warming up every day.
Right, because the learning really occurs at home, right? The lessons are about kind of how to practice and
Hmm.
how to learn and how
Hmm.
to think. And but it's while washing the dishes, it's in the shower, it's on the walk, it's
Hmm.
in the living room that the learning is occurring, or that they are deepening their retention. They might
Hmm.
acquire the skill in the moment in the lesson, but carrying over
Right.
without the teacher being there is a separate skill set in that way.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We have a comment question from Kathleen Bell. She says, I love this discussion about asking the student what they perceived. I do have a couple students that are either very young and don't have the words to express what they noticed, or students that are in the autistic spectrum that have trouble with self-perception. Do you have any strategies to help her help them?
Okay, thank you, Kathleen.
Great question.
Yes, uh, I call this the magic word technique, and I think it's the catch-all for everything. That all the rules, I think it comes into this, is identifying where, even remotely, the person has gotten closest to the target and giving them a reference point for success. So let me give you an example. So let's say we set this person wants to work on their contemporary mixed belt, and they feel like they're pushing nonstop. Let's say that's the creative brief, right? And so I would have them sing, and then I would ask them to notice where they felt the freest, kind of which words or which sounds felt the freest, and they might not know. So you might have to give them an example. You might have to give them an experience to compare the targets. So I'm listening for what the magic word is, the one word that was the freest. Even if it's not free, it's the freest. And the one word that was the least free. And I'll have them sing those two sessions to really raise the level of contrast between the two. So that at least we've eliminated a lot of the other distractions. So they're really just focusing on the freest sample and the tightest sample, but then not superimposing a word. I say, what's this to you? This one. Like, oh, that's my purple voice. And then great. And then what's this one? Oh, that's my yellow voice. Great. Doesn't have to mean anything to me. Purple voice sounds like that would last a little longer. Yeah. Okay. So can you sing it again in purple voice? And lo and behold, like 80% of the next sample is freer. Even if they don't necessarily know why, you've given them a reference point for success around something they've already done.
Hmm.
And so then they know where to go further. And I think even without having to consciously name it, somehow that unconsciously works. And I think I've used that in tons of different contexts that we can talk about. So I'm happy to talk about other ways to apply that.
Yes, please.
Okay, great. Like let's say in like acting monologue. I remember working with one of my teachers and doing it for them, and I wasn't really understanding the feedback. And then so I just said that I use this technique on myself. So I said, where did you feel I was most in it? Like where did you feel me? Or where did you get the intention? And they said, oh, this line. And then I thought to myself, oh, if that's what they're using as the reference point for success, I know what I'm doing there. Like I dug a little deeper there. This is a homework thing. I know what this line means on a very deep emotional level. This is still kind of on a surface level. For me, I really need to investigate what this is. It's not anything I'm doing. It is a homework issue. So, but there was no way they could have explained that to me. I just wanted them to know where was I even remotely successful in that way. Yeah. Or let's say if I'm working with people on a TED Talk, because of the stakes, people get very much in their head about writing the first draft of a TED Talk. So they get very stuck. So you have to make it very comfortable for them to write a really awful TED Talk at first. So write the worst TED Talk ever, and then their kind of temperature goes down. And what we're looking for is, instead of editing the draft, we're looking for the juiciest bits. So we do the reading and say, oh, paragraph 3, line 2, I feel like that is the essence of this talk. That was the most clear and the most compelling. What are you doing there? And then they say, oh, that's the way my grandmother used to talk. And I say, great. Can you write the second draft as if your grandmother was speaking through you? And then this incredible thing comes out. And so there's no way I could have edited the document for them in that way, but giving them a reference for success, then they can get excited about doing more of the positive thing versus trying to write a less crappy TED Talk. They can do more of the singing freely instead of focusing on not pushing. They can be more emotionally invested versus stopping schmacting, if that's a word. You know what schmacting?
It is tonight.
Yeah, schmacting. That was a monologue. What if that monologue made sense? I'm gonna ask you. I'm gonna scan. What if that monologue that I just gave you made sense, Kari?
Well, I love that, picking out what resonated with them and building an entire TED Talk around that. I mean, that's a motto for life, right? Pick out the kernel of truth and honesty and passion and build something from that. Uh-oh, we lost. Hang on.
Yeah.
There. Sorry, we lost you, or at least
I'm
I
here.
lost. Good.
Yeah. Let me just switch to it switches from my 5G to my 2G. So let me just switch that one sec.
Hang on just a second. You're not quite back yet for me anyway.
There I am.
There you go.
Yeah. Sometimes it switches 5G to 2G. I can't figure out why that does that. But we're back now.
Good. Go ahead. So is that, did I answer all right?
Yes, of course. So you responded most to the application of that to TED Talk, right? That felt like a novel thing. I think, yeah, it's all about finding kind of where they are already doing well. And so again, that is me superimposing my idea. Like, if they're trying to language to me, this is not me just totally being in reference to the client. You can still say, I felt you the most at this section. Or if you were trying to be clear, I perceived you as clearest in the third paragraph. And then what were you doing there? Like, oh, I think I often get too much into exposition. I can just cut to the chase. Great. What would it be like to write from the perspective of just cutting to the chase? Again, their words,
Yes.
but we both agreed, like, oh, this was the magic. So, and also referring it to it as magic word, magic slide, magic note, makes it that you're both on the same scavenger hunt, and it's not at all about avoiding ugly sounds.
I love that. Oh, that's wonderful. Margaret Garrett, I asked, what was the name of the person who taught you the way of thinking about making corrections? It's a helpful way of thinking, and do you have a book or online resource?
Yeah, it's good. It's a good question. I don't know where that magic word thing came. I think it came from my friend Angela, who was a speech pathologist, and she taught me. I used to be a pediatric speech pathologist, so I was working with kids with cerebral palsy, and then I went to different populations along the way. Oh, I know what it was. It was during those years about working with kids, and that I realized you can't get anyone to stop doing anything. At least is my bias. You can only get them to do more of something else. So, for example, you could say, don't blink. And then, of course, we're just going to blink because we're thinking about blinking. But if I said, keep your eyes open as long as possible, it's the same thing, but you're naming the thing that you want to have happen, not naming the thing that you don't want to happen.
Yeah.
So you're positively reinforcing the target behavior and almost ignoring the other parts. So by labeling something as the magic word, you are positively reinforcing that this is the token of success. And here's how you earn the A. If you want the A, what's this? We love this section. I want more of this. We don't talk about how to avoid the F. We talk about how, like, where the A already exists in you, and we go more. I think I learned that from working with kids with autism and working with like the little ones. I also remember teaching my dog how to stop barking. That was the same thing.
Oh.
Bark, bark, bark. I want the cookie. Bark, 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 bark. I want the cookie. And then for 1 millisecond, they go, and in between barking, and then you give them the cookie, and they realize, wait a second, I get the cookie for being quiet. Oh, I get the cookie. So there's no way to tell a dog to stop barking, but you can reward it for being quiet. And I was like, oh, this is going to work perfectly for humans.
We need to give our students cookies more.
Exactly. Gorgeous high C, pianissimo fades away, vibrato. There you go. Cookie.
But all of that does help create a safe space, especially this idea of magic words. You know, again, in the academic environment, and I don't know, just from the training I came from, it was serious stuff. It wasn't fun. I don't want to imply that it wasn't fun, but we wouldn't have been given cookies.
Exactly. I think that the people could easily think of this as Pollyannaism, or just like making everyone feel happy all the time, like, and everyone gets the blue ribbon. It's not at all about that. It's almost like being super clear with what the measure of success is. And I almost view it's like, let's say the person is an absolute beginner, right? And you want to teach skill X. You can have them do whatever you're having them do, sing happy birthday, sing this aria, and well, then name what was the one part of it where they were closest to the target, even if close means 1% closer, and using that as a reference point for success, and going back again and singing from that perspective, you'll notice now they're 10% closer to the target with almost less rigmarole and less explaining. For some reason, so I don't totally understand. I would love someone to research why this works.
Do you ever use negative practice?
All the time, yeah.
Okay.
And in a playful way. Then I then it becomes like you get the A by making me laugh. Like let's say, or because I want big enough contrast between the target sample and the negative that I would say that my brother would be able to tell the difference. Not that he's like doesn't get it, but I just use him as a reference point. Like I want this to be such a distinct difference between the two samples of what we want to do and what we're trying to avoid doing, so that your brain really knows what the two opposing forces are. And so negative practice, it's kind of like getting me to laugh by doing the silly sample that way. Again, not labeling it as bad or don't do that, or like make sure you never, make that sound in front of someone. It's more like, okay, we know that this monster lives over here, and let's talk about more of the magic words.
Love that. Okay, so here's a couple questions from Dan Minton. He says, so much of this seems to spring from growth mindset. What are some strategies teachers can use to start trying on this way of being in the real world so that studio integration is seamless? A couple more. Did you decide to consciously reframe observations as questions? Or is there some other principle that underpins the way we can interact with our students to move away from the mentor-disciple paradigm into that collaborative service provision?
Okay, I want to put that all in a soup.
Yeah.
Let's stir that up. So you are correct, Dan. I was inspired by Carol Dweck's work on having a not yet mindset. Instead of giving people pass fail, it's just being transparent with people where they are on their success journey and saying, oh, this is where you currently are. You've not yet mastered this aspect of it. With X strategies, we then can get you that much further. Like almost keeping it very sort of diagnostic in that way, and it removes the emotional language of passing and failing. So I definitely was inspired by that. I think the translation part of things came from working with dancers. And I guess at some point I realized, or even folks who were not native English speakers, that if I was working with a non-native English speaker, was constantly asking for translation. So for example, let's say trying to explain legato to a person who identifies as a dancer first. And I said, when you hear this sound or when you listen to this, what does that mean to you? And they say, oh, that's like élanger. I'm like, okay, what is that? It's like extending the energy out beyond your fingertips. It's like, and so they know it on some level. They often people have a scaffold of learning underneath that is from their primary way of viewing the world. And I have a bias that we know these things on certainly an intuitive level. So I try to ask people like, okay, here's what I'm going for. What does that mean in your world? If you were to translate this thing, vocal thing, into a dance concept, what would that mean? Or if you were to translate this vocal thing into an acting concept, what would that mean? Or this weird sound I'm making, knowing what you know about science or formats and harmonics, what is that? Okay, so you're almost like being humble by not playing dumb, but making the other person the smartest person in the room and letting them, you're trying to learn their language because I trust that on some level they do know where you both are headed. Is that too abstract, or does that make sense?
Makes sense to me.
Okay.
Let's see if Dan pops in and says.
So you can ask questions.
Yeah. And a couple people are asking, it's Carol Dweck, D-W-E-C-K. Is that right? D-W?
Yes.
Yeah. Is that where that language growth mindset is such a buzzword now a day? Is that from her? I don't know. I just know
it's not from her. I know that's part of her body of work, or that she's of that lineage.
Does that really come from the therapy world? Does it come from the business world? Do you know its orientation?
I don't know where it comes from. I think it comes from the like positive psychology and neuroscience world.
Okay.
And education. Yeah, but so I think she's an educator. She's I don't know her background, but she has a great TED talk on this topic. Look up Carol Dweck.
Oh, okay. let's see if I don't want to leave questions. We've got time for questions, everyone, so please feel free. Julie K. Seegers says, one of the good things with the virus situation at her university is allowing the students to decide what they want to work on this quarter. Tremendous fun and work for the students and me. That was back when I think I was sharing too about listening to people. Lots of creative things during this time through using Zoom lessons.
Mm.
What was the name of the book? Oh, Kitty Verdolini. Verdolini. You might sometimes see it, Catherine Verdolini Abbott. And of course, she and Ingo Titsa have a chapter on motor learning that some of this talks about in the vocology. And I would put people to the NATS Journal of Singing, Lynn Helding's column, now Lynn Maxfield's column, and Lynn Helding's new book also on cognition called The Musician's Mind. So there's some great people doing work out there on this topic. Tom, do you have others that you know of that I?
Yeah, as you were mentioning resources, it kind of made me think about where else I was observing the reason why for this, and I think a lot of it did even stem from American Idol of all places, is watching people be shamed for being pitchy or being too blank, some sort of pejorative adjective.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand the idea when you're judging something, you can say it's too this, it's too that, but there's like a meanness that I observe in a lot of these pop culture shows, even if it's a cooking show. But if you watch the Great British Bake Off, they're not mean like a lot of American TV shows are.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of do this mention, and this is why people love the Great British Bake Off, is because they will reference what they enjoyed about it and what they wish they had more of, versus why you suck as a chef in that way. So the meanness that kind of I just got totally sick of that in pop culture and online, and I'm absolutely adamant about that in all the groups that I facilitate, that no one is allowed to give feedback in any of my groups except me. But they are allowed to talk about what they enjoyed about each other's process.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like the slippery slope of meanness and lack of conciseness and lack of pointing out what's possible, I think that, like, the American Idol judge should say, you were most accurate in the bridge. Unfortunately, the first, second, and third verse did not have the pitch accuracy of the bridge. And as a result, I don't know if you're at the professional level right now to proceed. Next, like, it doesn't have to be necessarily sweet as pie, but just pointing out where, like,
Specific.
yeah, be specific, and also be as specific with the positive as you are with the negative in that way. And so no room for meanness in this world, especially now.
It's yes. And that's one of my pet peeves is a colleague will just say, oh, that student's German was terrible. And I'm thinking, could you be specific? Because that's not my experience, that their German was terrible. Oh, well, they needed to close their A vowel, Dean. They needed to close it more. Okay, well, that's specific.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a whole lot good in
Yes.
that feed that they just sang, right?
And also evaluating, okay, where did they get closest to a native German speaker? Based upon that, was there some common denominator that made them sound closest to a native German speaker? Based upon that criteria, what might we infer from what they're doing to the opposite? Is it that they're in an effort to be more speaky in the recitative part, they're bringing too much of their American dialect into the speakiness? Mm-hmm. So how can they be this native German speaker in the non-sung sample? That's an interesting question. How to be less terrible is not an interesting question.
I love that.
How to be less terrible? Please study with me. Come learn to be less terrible.
Oh my gosh, there's probably somebody out there selling that. Could you spell, somebody's asking, Kim Steinhauser, I'll let you spell that.
Steinhauer is Steinhauer.
There's no S? Power.
No,
Oh,
pride power.
sorry. Okay, that they.
Single power. Yes.
So Deborah wants to know, what is your favorite go-to method for making a new student feel vocally comfortable working with you for the first time? I often hear after the fact that students were so nervous to make sounds in the lessons, the first few lessons. Would love to speed up that comfort level. Great question, Deborah. Love that.
Okay. Okay. I do lots of character voices or family members. So it's like embodying different people. So, okay, let's sing happy birthday, and we're going to be your cousin that doesn't like birthday parties. Like, happy birthday to you. Okay, now we're going to do it like you're a famous opera singer. Okay, now we're going to do it like you're a chipmunk. Now we're going to do it like you are a breathy little child. So playing around with all these different sounds and laughing at each of them and never letting on that one is better than the other. I kind of think of training the voiceover artist and the animation voiceover artist in all of us first, and who then becomes an actor, who then becomes a singer, who then becomes a style specific singer. So rewarding versatility and play from the beginning, and that they know that that is our work. And then, oh, by the way, now we'll lean into this one thing, and we're going to really dial in this one character who might be the world famous opera singer or the Broadway beltress in that way. But underneath, you get the gold star for me for the number of characters and the amount of play you can bring. So I try to get them to make silly sounds. And then I say, who in your family talks like that? I'm like, oh, that's my Aunt Sally. What does she say? She's like, Charlie, you're always late for work. And they're like, okay, can you sing like that? So there's lots of comedic live theater, I would say.
Lots of play, which which is one of the things that we had talked about, is that you use a lot of play.
Yeah, and I really do think that stems from working with the little ones. I think early on I realized that the sense of humor and trying to make people laugh is what endears them to you for life in that way. And I remember working with little kids. It didn't take much too. I remember doing home-based early intervention for kids 18 to 36 months. And I knew if you got them to laugh in the first session, they were yours forever. And it always was like doing the silliest things. Like the kids loved these 3 blocks. I would take like the ABC blocks. And instead of building the blocks, they wanted to do something special with it. So like I also had a rubber duck. And so if you turn the rubber duck, there's a hole in the rubber duck. And so the kids would like to, we would put the blocks on top of each other, and then you take the rubber duck and you squeeze it, and the air would knock a block off into a bucket.
Yeah.
And this dumbest thing, they would just howl laughing, and then you could get them to, speech therapy was very easy after that, because they would do anything. They would try to say any word to get that duck to blow the block.
So what did we learn here tonight, everybody? Cookies and squeezing rubber duckies. That's our take.
Basically, be a preschool teacher, and that's the secret to everything.
But aren't we all at some part of us are always, we never lose our little kid self, especially in a new environment. We revert back to the first day of school, right? So I love that, putting people at ease. Maria.
The science now that supports that, right? The things we just do intuitively, and we think, oh, well, that's just me being nice. So no, there's actually research that now supports those things.
Right. Thank goodness. Maria is writing in, she teaches in Greece, and she says, your method provides a level of freedom. Does the student respond to this immediately? She teaches in Greece where students have been forced by other teachers to accept the role of a dependent. Great
question. I am totally aware of my American bias in this, and also that the teacher-student dynamic is different around the world. This idea that, I'm your friend and a playmate is just not how other cultures view teacher-student relationships. I know that when I teach in Stockholm often, and there's a different way of interacting that took a little bit more, I felt like cajoling to get the play going from my colleagues over there. And I think that that's where over the years, I've just tried to be more comfortable saying like, hey, this is who I am and this is how I can be with you. And this is the best way for me to give you my special sauce. If we can try on this. Yes, I'm your teacher, but here are the rules of the classroom. So I think I have to kind of set the context more in order to create this space more. And I think that that's been a little bit different versus some of my New Yorkers who are more overly casual and kind of presume you're their friend from the beginning anyway. I had a college student one time come in when I worked at Pace University on her first day of school. She said, "Hey, dude." And I said, "Mr. Burke will suffice. Thank you." You know, so she clearly knew the rules at that point, but we still had a playful relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's about setting the context of what you know works.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that's what I would say. It's the most important part, the context of why.
Mm-hmm. Mariana asks, what is your approach for group classes and the quickest way to create a safe space for a group? Great
Okay,
question.
I teach groups all the time, and at the end of everyone, let's say we do a master class, at the end of everyone's session, I say, what did you find most useful about your own process? Or what did you enjoy most about that? So that everyone comments on what they enjoyed and why is that relevant to their process. So it's not necessarily about validating or invalidating that person, it's that we're collectively learning. I also set the rules early on that we only comment on magic words. And I think teaching people to look for magic words is a whole new skill set for them. So training them early on, okay, we're gonna have so-and-so sing, and based upon their criteria, this is what we're looking for. Folks, I want you in the chat window on Zoom, write down what are the top 3 words you heard that are closest to what they're going for. And what's cool is oftentimes we see common denominators with those words. And then we look for like, okay, well, what do we think is going on with that particular section that was so successful in that way? So people, I think in a group setting, people like a group challenge, like, oh, we are collectively trying to figure out this problem so we can help our colleague, versus we're all sitting there watching you try not to screw up. Like that's the energy. We're all kind of like, we're going to gather around and we're all going to try to find your magic words together. That seems to be a unifying group experience.
Mm-hmm. I love that. That's great advice. One more from Byrne, who says, for singers with newly discovered pathologies who may apply harsh judgment to how their voice sounds, or who now may have fears about using their voices a certain way, do you have any advice about how to help them find safety in singing again? Great question.
Great question. So the essence would still be the same. Let's say early on in voice therapy, if you're doing lots of semi-occluded vocal tract exercises. So you're working with, let's say, lip trills, fricatives, nasals. We play games, which it would be like, find your favorite fricative and say that 10 times fast. So I would have them do like, ooh, and compare that with, and compare that with, and compare that with, and have them forced rank, meaning line them up in order, which one was the easiest and which one was the hardest. And we kind of, I pretend it's like a chorus line where we're calling back certain sounds. And say, okay, great. So what was it about the z that feels easy, whereas the z feels a little clunky and weird? And like really like being in a place of curiosity and helping them with their awareness, but like figuring out, even if they both feel tight, let's say, why is one less tight? They start to develop an awareness of what they might be doing that is blocking their sense of freedom. And also giving them even the remotest experience of success in that moment right there. They tasted freedom for a second, and we labeled that, versus having to go through lots of other steps. Does that make sense? In terms of, it's the same thing. Like you're still trying to find the magic fricative or the magic trill.
Mm-hmm. Tom, as we come to the top of the hour, is there any part of what we've discussed tonight that is challenging to translate into online, which we're all doing right now. Do you have any advice for all of us about how to abide by some of these strategies online?
I think the reason why I've exclusively taught online for the past nearly 7 or 8 years is because I feel like a lot of these principles work even better online. Just in summary, because because it is tiring to do a 1 hour lesson with someone. I prefer 30-minute lessons via Zoom, and then working asynchronously during the week via Marco Polo, so that people can show me videos of what they're doing at home and give them short feedback on magic words, intermittent terminal feedback, not blocked practice. A lot of the motor learning principles really work well online. Also, having them, you mute yourself while they sing, take notes on what's working, what's not working, synthesize those notes into the magic words and only reference that. So say, oh, based upon what you wanted, you were doing it here, here, and here. What's that about? Bam, do it again. Mute, take notes. I think because of the clunky nature of online, it actually is more conducive to a stop, evaluate way, whereas in real life, it's easy to be like in the flow a lot and in the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like a lot of these things actually work even better online. And so maybe that's why I developed a bias towards those things.
Mm-hmm. I love that. What a great answer. And I just want to reiterate what you said about it is a time to be kind. As we bring the Nats chat to a close, at least the regularly scheduled ones this season, Alan and I might schedule a couple other special edition due to COVID. But I was so disturbed this morning as the conversations now start about going back on in person, like where are we in this process? And there's going to be a joint chat this Tuesday that people know about already. The webinar is closed at this point, but there will be a recording available. But I was just so disturbed at the anger and the veracity of the anger against people who were just asking, do you think it would be okay to do in person? And I think that's going to be a personal choice. I think you have to listen, whatever community you're in, you have to listen to your organizers of that community. But regardless, let's practice being kind. And if you have an opinion about what's working for you and you want to respond online to somebody, do it in a way that's kind.
Absolutely. And try to focus on what the person is actually, what's the magic word of it? The person is really saying, eventually we have to go back to something. What's the right balance? How do we know when? Right? The magic word underneath there is when. Like
When.
there's a way to de-escalate the
Mm-hmm.
situation by trying to honor the person in their imperfect nature is trying to get an answer in a very difficult question that we all are struggling with right now.
Right.
Let's zoom in on the part of the question that's useful and let them off the hook, even if they are being a jerk. Like they don't need us to then exacerbate the situation. Like
Mm-hmm.
raise the bar and like be the light.
I love that. Find the magic word. What really is trying to be answered. Yeah. What a perfect way to end tonight, Tom. Thank you so much for joining us and for your generosity of your time and expertise. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Attendees, thank you for joining me all season. And again, we may have a one or two other special edition to get us through COVID. So stay tuned for that. But for now, please stay healthy and stay safe. And I will for sure see you in the fall. Good night, everyone.